Welcome, you are listening to the Twice Over Movies podcast. In these first few episodes, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes explaining who we are and what we're doing with this podcast and website. So as you can tell, this podcast is specifically about movies. My name is Faraz and I'll be hosting each episode alongside a rotating co-host between Fahad, Yousuf, and Farhan. Each episode is for one movie. We will spend 10 to 20 minutes discussing our scores without giving away any major spoilers. Afterwards, we will have a spoiler alert, and then we will dive into a deeper discussion into the movie. And that will go as long as it goes, maybe 15 to 45 additional minutes. Our scores are broken into 5 segments of a movie. First, acting, defined as the execution of the writing and story by the actors. Second, direction and plot, defined as the entertainment value, pace, and audience connection. Third is the writing, which is defined as primarily the dialogue. Fourth is the cinematography and photography, defined as the visual appeal of the movie. Fifth, themes and motifs, defined as the presentation of the underlying message and/or idea. For each of these categories, we assess if it was substantive, purposeful, logical, engaging, satisfying, clear, consistent, etc. This is where the website comes into play. Depending on how you order the importance of the categories mentioned, you will get a composite score indicating the strength of the movie on your standards. Currently, you will see a score based only on how the host rated the movie, but we have every intention to include you into the process to add a community score alongside the host score. We hope you enjoyed the podcast, continue listening, and support us. Now on to the episode.
What?
What?
We're supposed to win this by 2. They just turned over with 12 on the clock.
We have to foul.
No,
we have to foul.
No, we foul here. I missed the first free throw. They come back with a 3. That's right. That's right. Yep. Man, are you hungry? I haven't eaten since later this afternoon.
Everyone, this is Faraz.
Hey, this is Yousuf.
And we are reviewing today Primer 2004 film directed by Shane Carruth. I hope I'm saying that right.
I hope so.
It's a independent movie that came out with a $7,000 budget. It has become a cult classic at this point. And this was a movie selected, I guess, mutually between both of us because you had recently watched it and liked it. And even though these were one of the first 5 that I asked you to pick, but I kind of also pushed it.
Yeah, I love really intricate time travel movies generally, so this was right up my alley. So it had been something that I watched recently, but I'm I was just kind of coming around to this particular one, I guess. I'm a longtime fan of the genre, I suppose, and I think you had seen it quite a while ago, but had always kind of raved about it. So
Yeah,
it was a very good pick to discuss, and there is a lot to discuss in this one.
probably more than we can fathom.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited to see how well this conversation or how off the rails it gets, because just literally even just using the English language to speak about this film is kind of difficult at times.
All right, so let's just get the scores out of the way then so we can get to that.
Let's do it.
I gave the writing an 80.
Okay. What about that exactly did you like?
As far as the writing goes, I thought it's a very complicated story, right? And the dialogue is equally complicated. You got these guys that are using actual physicist terms, and if you aren't educated in that science, you can be lost at times. And I think that's obviously very purposeful. They do that on purpose to add complexity to the story and to keep the viewer engaged, to keep the viewer paying attention. Since it was purposeful and since it did feed into the overall story and the feel of the movie, I thought the writing did its job pretty well. And it was one of the more stronger points because it's a very complicated story and we're still somehow able to follow along more or less. Maybe not obviously exactly, but more or less you can follow along.
Okay, I'm right there with you. So I gave it a 75 on writing. Yeah, but like you said, the dialogue is very complex, and that's kind of a device in itself to kind of give you the feel of, I don't know, just the level of things that are going on. But it's not something that we can really necessarily understand and digest in that moment. But the complexity of that language is a strong suit, and also a lot of lines that may not seem so significant in the moment, may end up having more meaning than you think. And I kind of like how they weave that into kind of the general conversation that they're having.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I noticed that on a second. I mean, this is my, I think, 4th time watching this movie now, And this is the only time I've obviously taken notes while watching it. And yeah, I noted a few times, a few moments where there was something that was said that made it, that really fed into the story, but it was super subtle. Like you would not catch it on your first time viewing it.
Yeah, 100%. And the last thing I'll say is that the dialogue itself is kind of an important plot device, and we'll get into what that means later. But it's, there's the dialogue itself, the even just the simple back and forth that they're having that are maybe meaningless. There, that's actually like important in terms of what we're talking about from like a sci-fi standpoint. But yeah, so what about the story and plot? What did you have there?
All right, so this is probably the highest score I've given anything so far. I give it a 95. I love this story. I love the complexity of it. I love how it just keeps the viewer like coming back for more and trying to figure it out as if we have a chance, but like there's like enough there to like make you think that you have a chance of figuring it out. But it's just so well done. It's so like if you consider how complicated it is and how in 70 like 5 minutes, like it's a pretty short movie, they get a lot across in that short period of time in a very complicated story, and somehow we're still like following along. So I just thought it was very well done. I actually like the direction a lot as well. Same thing, when it's a story that's this complicated, to have an audience like somehow like keeping up, I think that's an impressive feat in itself. So I liked it a lot.
I had it as a 95 as well. So I'm right there with you. I think that, I mean, this is one of the, for somebody who's seen a bunch of time travel movies, this is one of the more intricate, more complex takes on how time travel works. And it still all kind of makes logical sense in terms of how they piece all that together. I thought it was extremely well done. One thing we also have to address is that, I mean, this is like the most indie of indie films. It was made on a tiny, tiny budget of I think a few $1,000s, if I'm not mistaken.
7,000 is what I found online.
7,000. There you go. So we're talking about somebody, I mean, who just decided to put this together with a few friends, basically, and funded it themselves, probably, right? So
Yeah, Shane Carruth, the director who played Aaron in the movie, he directed it, he wrote it, he did the music for it, he produced it.
that's yeah.
I
So
mean, he acted in it, starred in it. I mean, he just did
you got
everything.
to give them props like to come up with such a intricate time travel story on that kind of budget, just a couple of interested minds kind of putting this together on their own. That is extremely impressive. So we have to get, this is where we're going to spend I think a lot of our time discussing, because this story is wild. But I think it deserves all the praise in the world. I honestly almost would have gone 100 on it, but the one thing that I thought was that the way that the film is edited at times can be very confusing and distracting. I mean, this is kind of inevitable when we're talking about such a complex plot, but I thought that there was certain ways that they probably could have alleviated that a little bit and made things a little bit easier to digest. Maybe that was like part of my like paranoid sense watching a movie like this, where I'm just like constantly waiting for something crazy to happen. So when there's like sudden cuts and things, I'm like looking for the crazy explanation. That maybe it makes it easy for me to overlook kind of like the simpler, straightforward aspect of what's going on. Maybe that's part of this is playing in where I'm just kind of looking for the crazy thing, and that's kind of messing with my perception. But I did think that the editing could have used some work. And again, you have to recognize this guy was editing this on his own over a period of several years with no real budget. It's actually very well done when you think about it from that standpoint. But I think that's one place where it shows that they really didn't have much budget to work with.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to the cinematography score.
Sure. So cinematography, I gave it a 70 on cinematography. I didn't think it was bad, but I don't think there's anything particularly, beautiful about this movie. And I don't think it's meant to be either, right? Basically, what we have is, a couple of guys working in a garage, and then working, they're in a small town. They're coming in and out of kind of these like storage facilities for a lot of the movie. There's not a lot that's like super pleasant there, but again, everything's very purposeful. I think like they don't really mess around in terms of the visuals, right? They're very focused on the story and what they're trying to accomplish there. So it's not the worst thing. I gave it a 70 because I think there's not a whole lot to take away, but there's nothing horrible about it either.
Yeah, I actually gave it exactly a 70 as well. Considered it generally average, but like you said, it was purposeful. The shots did seem well thought out. And all right, yeah, let's just move on to let's move on to the next category. Let's talk about the acting.
The acting, I gave it a 65, a little below average. That's probably the lowest score I have on this movie. Again, we're talking about a couple of just like indie filmmakers who are acting themselves in this movie, right? So there are certain parts where I think, you can tell they're obviously not professional actors. Some of that I think gets later rectified by the story, which I don't want to dive into too much right now. But there is some parts that I thought were kind of lacking in terms of believability.
Yep, I gave it. This is also my lowest score for the movie. For the categories, I gave it a 60. I mean, it's not horrible. It's not like bad by any means, but this is one place I thought Shane Carruth was not that great. But David Sullivan, the guy playing Abe, I thought was actually pretty good. And honestly, it's just these two guys. Otherwise, it's like a bunch of, very limited supporting actors and actresses. And none of them had any moments that made you think, oh, wow, these guys are good. But considering everything, these guys are doing it on their own time. It's an indie film. It's not bad, but it's 60, right? It is the weakest point of the movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think Abe actually does some pretty good acting, especially relatively. I think he kind of carries it a bit. It's more where Shane Current is acting where you can kind of see a little bit more lacking, but that's okay. And so the last category, right? Motifs and themes. What'd you got?
I gave it an 80.
I gave it exactly an 80 as well. So you want to get into that a bit?
Well, I mean, I thought it's a pretty complex story again. So there wasn't any real in your face themes that they were showing or trying to present, I thought. But you have, the paradoxes that come as a result of time travel. And then you have like these instances of different timelines. And, what's like morally okay. Like there's one point in the movie where Aaron wants to go back and punch his boss in the face, but also wants to go back again and tell himself not to do it. So he only gets the feeling of doing it, but not actually having to do it in real. I mean, like it's like the morality of what you is acceptable and not acceptable when you have the power of going back in time. So these guys are also going back in time and taking advantage of the knowledge that they gain to game the stock market and make some money off of it. Otherwise, I didn't really see much else in terms of a strong theme. It's more like, all right, you have a power, how do you use it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I gave it as high a score as I did, mostly because of the sci-fi aspects that we have going on here. So this is not kind of typically what you think of when you think motifs and themes, but the way that they present time paradoxes and how they deal with that, that is very important. That's kind of a crucial concept for a time travel movie, surely, and for sci-fi movies
Yeah.
in general. So I think they played that very well. Again, going hand in hand with how good the story was. I think they played that really well. And so that kind of gives them, big ups in this category. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about morality and control as well.
So we're pretty close on everything here, except for writing. I gave it a slightly higher than you, but then you combated with the acting being 5 higher than
Yeah,
mine.
I think
Everything else was equal. So on my scale, man, I gave this movie a 75. Yours is a
okay.
79.
Yeah, so that's pretty close. Yeah, we are pretty hand in hand in terms of each category here. So
Yeah.
I think we should. I really want to get into the story and talk about what the hell is going on. So I'm very excited to do that.
All right, everyone, this is a spoiler alert for you if you have not seen this movie. I actually definitely suggest do not listen beyond because this movie has a lot of spoilers and it's a very significant part about the movie. But if you really don't care or you have seen it, continue listening. All right, Yousuf, what do you want to get started with?
Let's just dive into the story, man. I think that's where all the action is at, and there is a lot to discuss. So let's just dive right into it. What do you think? What excited you about the story?
Okay, so what excited me about this story, main points would be how it's confusing, but there's like a glimpse of hope in me that I can figure it out exactly what's happening. And this is a movie where you have to look it up, Google it after, and try to see other people's theories and synopsis of the movie so it can help you better understand. Now, the basic thing we need to talk about when it comes to time travel movies, there are multiple timelines. With these multiple timelines, we have multiple instances of these individuals that are traveling in time. So we have multiple Abes, we have multiple Aarons. And now the difficult part was trying to figure out which Aaron is which and which Abe is which. Actually, Abe is a little more easy because he's not as reckless as Aaron with the whole time travel and the paradoxes and the whole, I guess, contamination where Aaron is like coming in contact with his double over and over again, and how many times he's gone back in time he can't even tell you, because he has that one point where that one story at Rachel's or at Philip's, not Philip, sorry, at Robert's birthday party, Rachel's ex-boyfriend comes in with a shotgun. He has like this one line where he says, like, I don't know how many times like we've gone through this now for this to work out the way it worked out. So, I mean, as far as the story goes, like there's first things first is trying to figure out how many instances of these people are there and who is who. And I think it mainly relates only to Aaron, because if we can figure out Aaron, then we can probably get an idea of, I think Abe was pretty simple and we can get an idea of what actually
So,
happened.
like, diving right into that birthday party scenario, like, I do want to talk about what was it that was so significant about that? Because Aaron definitely seems stuck on that moment, and he keeps coming back to it. And from the narration and from Abe's perspective, it's clear that we don't even know how many times Aaron has gone back in time to try and recorrect that moment or get it exactly right. So, like, is it ever made clear exactly why he's so obsessed with this?
It isn't. I just assumed it was because he wanted. It's two things. It's one, maybe he messed up in trying to solve the issue at the party. As in, maybe people were terrified, and I don't know. It doesn't seem like anyone ever actually got hurt, but we don't know how many instances there were, right? So, like, I have no idea. But I just think the second thing, which is a more reasonable, what I'm gonna assume as the actual reason, is that Aaron just liked the feeling of being a hero, and that's why he was going back and reliving
I
it.
think, yeah, I agree. I think we don't actually know if Aaron got, badly injured the first time, if other people were killed the first time. We don't know this because, as Abe says, it's only the last instance that something was changed that ends up being kind of the instructive timeline. So their experience is kind of dictated by whatever happened in the final timeline where things were not affected, right? So if Aaron keeps going back and changing things, we'll never, as a viewer, and as as Abe and Aaron are living out this scenario, they're never going to experience the previous timelines that have been wiped out and overwritten, so to speak, right? So yeah, we don't know if there was a catastrophe the first time around, and Aaron kind of corrected that by stepping in. A second thing to note, I think, is that there is some commentary going on here about how satisfied Aaron is with, obviously Aaron and Abe from the beginning of the movie are very dissatisfied with kind of their work life. They're very disgruntled employees, right? And that's why they're working on
Yeah.
all this. But I think Aaron is also very dissatisfied with his home life. He does not seem to care about his wife and kid, whereas Abe is always kind of instructing him that he should be more concerned about them
He's like reminding him all the
all the
time,
time.
like, hey, you have a wife and
Yeah, and
kids,
it comes up with the birthday party incident as well, because Abe tells him, "You have a
Yeah.
wife and kid, you can't go risking your life like that." But it's clear that Aaron keeps going back to that moment and keeps risking his life, and he wants to be the hero, right? So there's some sort of escape going on for him here, and when he's getting that attention and when he's getting the recognition, that is what he craves more than just having himself safe and being with his family. And that comes up a few other times. It also comes up towards the end of the movie where basically, Abe and Aaron, the final versions of Abe and Aaron, we can say, are standing in the airport and kind of discussing the fact that they should, get the hell out of Dodge. They should just go to another country and stop interfering with their own selves' lives from the past, right? And Aaron makes kind of like a sticking comment where he's like, if you go back and bring, Lauren and Kara, or Laura and Kara, and he bring his wife and kid.
Lauren and Kara, I
So
think.
he says, if you can go back in time with Lauren and Kara and bring them through the box, then you can have a second, copy of them, and we don't have to fight about this all the time. And it's kind of pointing out the fact that, why are you always so concerned about my wife and kid more than I am?
Yeah, it's kind of awkward almost. It's like, whoa.
It's very awkward. So I think that's kind of the final moment where he, like, this is all subtle discussion going on in the background. They don't spend a lot of time diving into kind of the emotional aspect of their family lives, but that's kind of Aaron saying, why are you so concerned about what's going on with my wife and kid? You know what? You should just have them. So, I think that the birthday party incident kind of ties back into that, and we can see that in retrospect.
All right, so I think let's start with the ending of the movie. I think that'll be easier to get the discussion going.
I hope so. Let's try
Who
it.
is the Aaron that we see at the very end who's in France, like building what we can assume is a much bigger version of the time travel box? Which Aaron is
Okay.
that? I assumed it was the narrator, and then some of my research after the movie showed that a lot of other people also assumed him to be the narrator.
Okay, so I actually did not assume that to be the narrator. I assumed that to be a middling version of Aaron from all the travel back in time. So, one significant scene from earlier in the movie that we see is Aaron who comes back through. Dude, this is really hard. I think we need to figure out some nomenclature to how we're going to talk about the different versions.
Okay, yes.
How do we do this?
I'm not sure, man. Okay, so okay, this is how I see it. We have two Abes. We have the original Abe, and I think there's only one time that the original Abe comes in contact with his second self, which is when he puts him to sleep with the oxygen mask
Right,
and like stuffs
right.
him in the bathroom. I think that second Abe, that did that to the original Abe. That second Abe was the failsafe one, the one that went
Yeah.
to the failsafe machine and went back 4 days.
So I think that one's pretty easy, right? We can just call that original Abe and failsafe Abe, right?
Yep. Okay, that's what we have. And now for Aaron, I think we have the same thing. We have the original Aaron. He's the one
Yeah,
that's gonna be in the attic,
yeah. Then
right?
he eventually goes to the failsafe himself, right?
Uh,
And drugs himself.
Yeah, so original Aaron goes to the failsafe, and then the failsafe Aaron comes out, drugs the original Aaron, puts him in the attic. But then remember, now the failsafe Aaron took a box with him back in time,
Yeah, and then he goes
and then
back
he set up a
again.
new one over
Right,
there.
right.
So then you have the failsafe Aaron. After he drugs the original Aaron, I assume he went back in time again. So basically, with the second machine that he has set up with the
Mhm.
second box, and then you have that's like the third Aaron.
Because he confronts himself. He confronts the failsafe Aaron at that point, right?
Yeah, that's like when this was the most confusing part of the movie for me.
Yeah.
It was where you saw Aaron basically saying bye to himself at the front door. And I was like, wait, is this the same as the attic one? I was so
That's the
confused.
scene I want to get into, and so that's why I was having trouble kind of stating that. So,
Yeah, so okay, so we have the failsafe Aaron, and then he goes back with this second box that he put at the failsafe spot,
yeah,
like 4 days prior. And then the third Aaron comes out of that box,
right,
who is now still 4 days back, but he has all the information from the
right,
failsafe Aaron.
right.
And they
So,
have like the same objective, right? That's what he kind of says. Like
yeah,
they have the same goals at this point, so the failsafe feels comfortable going away and leaving.
right.
So the extra box Aaron is the one who would have the earphone and have all of that recorded, have all the information recorded, so he can just follow a script.
So you want to just call that guy like Final Aaron or something?
Yeah, so let's call him Final Aaron. So we have original Aaron, failsafe Aaron, and Final Aaron.
Okay.
At least from what we can assume is Final Aaron. There could
Right.
be way
No,
more,
no, no, there
right?
there are. There's probably, like,
Yeah.
hundreds, but those are the 3 informative ones, I think.
Yeah, and then for Abe, we have original and failsafe.
Okay. Okay, so, basically, now that we have that sorted out, I don't think that we're viewing the narrator version of Aaron at the end of the movie. I think we are viewing failsafe Aaron, who agreed to leave because him and Final Aaron kind of have the same objectives at the end, right? So, he kind of, after some sort of awkward discussion, I'm sure, he decides to leave and get out of the way.
Wait, so for me, I think the narrator is the failsafe one because he's the one who decides to leave away, and he is like it makes sense for him to make this recording that's narrating the movie because he's because okay, look, there is at one point where the failsafe Aaron says, and that's where I would have entered the story or exited depending on your reference, right? So
Yes.
the narrator says that, so I think that is the failsafe one.
My issue with it is because how would this person who's narrating the movie, if that's the failsafe Aaron who pretty much leaves, how would he know everything that happens after that when he's kind of out of the scene?
Well, what really happens after that? I mean, everything that happens after that is not like it's not something the narrator needs to narrate at any point anymore. What happens after that is Abe goes to the failsafe. He comes out. he faints when he starts hearing Aaron following a script, right? All that stuff
Right.
just is a story now. There's nothing left to be narrated. Now it's just basically things getting revealed to Abe from the final Aaron.
So
Because then the
yeah.
final Aaron gives him the earphones, like, hey, look, I have it all recorded. And he's like listening in while, he's inviting that guy on the basketball court to the birthday party.
Okay, right. So basically, let me just tell you that my thought process was that we're actually hearing final Aaron narrating the story to failsafe Aaron, right? Because he says specifically that, like, I'm not going to repeat any of this again. Maybe you've been smart enough to record this, but this is the only time you get this information. This is the only time I'll contact you, and my debt to you has been paid, is what he says, right? So I kind of assumed that debt to be part of the bargain that they strike in that conversation before failsafe Aaron leaves and gets out of the way. And again,
Yeah.
he's in a foreign country, so we don't know exactly what that means. Maybe failsafe Aaron does leave the country in order to get out of the way. But I do see where you're coming from, and this is part of the great part about this movie. I don't think there's necessarily an absolute answer, like, because there's so many unknowns that are going on, right? We're talking about three versions of Aaron, but there's actually countless number, probably because of the number of times that Aaron probably went back to get the moment exactly right.
Okay, yeah. So okay, we have that. We have that. I get what you're saying. That also makes sense, and that's the scary part. Like,
Yeah.
okay, that kind of messes up what I was thinking.
So what do we think he's trying to do? What do you think he's trying to do in that moment, though? At the end of the movie, he's trying to build a much larger version of the time machine, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, okay, so not only remember when they first figure out what the machine is doing, how it's like basically anti-gravity is making something lighter,
Right.
and they mention like all the uses of it. Maybe he's just making a bigger version, not for the purpose of time travel, but for the purpose of, because remember, the only thing that makes it time travel is if you have a smart object in it, and the smart object being a human knowing when to exit on the other side, because it keeps cycling between A and B, right? And you need to know when to get out, but like an object like a watch did not know when to get out.
Right.
So I think maybe he's building, depending on which version of Aaron this is in the factory too, that makes a difference. If it's the one who is the fail-safe one who leaves like willingly, who I also thought was the narrator, like if it's him, I think it makes sense for him to be making something this big for like an actual world like use that's not gonna mess up, time travel and stuff. It's gonna be for like actual stuff
I
to like make shipping boxes lighter so it's cheaper to ship stuff. I don't know.
I gotta disagree. I don't think that this guy is trying to, revolutionize FedEx suddenly. I think Aaron as a character is just like,
But if it's the final Aaron that you're
yeah.
saying it is, then I'm more likely to think that he's doing something mischievous and is trying to build like a big freaking time machine. And but then the thing is, you can only go back to the time that you start at. So if they're building that big machine there at that time, and
Yeah, right.
that's the
Like,
limit
where
of it.
you can't go back and fix anything before this whole time travel mess started, right?
Yeah, and what are you gonna bring? Like, why do you need this to be so like big? Are you gonna take like a world with you, like a bunch of stuff with you?
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's a really good question, because that's all stuff that we don't know. I suppose one thing we can throw out there is that if it's that big, then it's a lot more comfortable, to the point where people could live in that machine for periods of time. So that opens up whole new applications in terms of how far back you can travel, right? You could travel back
Yeah.
weeks or months at that point. But again, the start point would always be whenever that structure is completed being built. So yeah, we don't really we don't really know what he's up to. But I gotta think Aaron is the one who, throughout the movie, as soon as this whole thing starts, he is obsessed with time travel. He's always trying to push the envelope more. I do not think that his mind is suddenly off of that in this particular scene, even if he is kind of the calmer failsafe Aaron who hasn't been totally messed up by rounds and rounds of time travel. I still they as they said, they had the same objectives, right? As final Aaron. So I don't think his mind is off of that and just moving on to other applications. I can't see that.
Okay, so how about this? When we're watching the movie, what timeline are we watching it
Okay,
in?
so that is a really good question, because I think this is something.
Like from the very
Yeah.
beginning, like when we're seeing these guys in the garage and all that.
So I think that's a tough question. Here's my.
Actually, I shouldn't say from the very beginning. I should say from when they first get that machine running, and then you see like it blacks out, and then you see Abe waking up in the apartment like a day later or something at night. So like that moment.
So that was a very confusing moment for me the first time around because like it sounds like something's happening with the machine. Like I don't know, like the first time watching and not knowing what was going on, I literally thought like the machine blew up and then like he woke up like on the ground like after being unconscious or something. And then like I was confused to realize like, oh, he was just in his apartment sleeping. Like that was just like kind of a interesting choice of how to cut to the next scene. So I'm not totally sure, but I do think that, you know, for the majority of the movie, we are watching the version that final Aaron is experiencing, right? So,
Okay, I was gonna say the middle one. So I was gonna say the failsafe
okay,
Aaron,
interesting.
the one right before the final.
That's also, you know, again, that's also equally possible, right? Because I think basically kind of the cutoff point to me is that scene on the bench where Abe goes to meet Aaron, who's sitting on the bench, supposedly listening to an NCAA game, and kind of tells
Yeah,
him like, "Hey, listen, like if you come with me, I'm going to show you something that's going to change your life, essentially," right?
yeah.
And so that's a scene that we come back to.
Most definitely, I think we both agree that's not the first time Aaron is
That's
going through
definitely not
that.
the first time.
Whether
Yeah.
it's failsafe or
Right. So
final
the
or
whole movie
whichever,
we're
it's
led
not
to
his first
believe
time.
that's kind of the first, you know, time that Aaron is experiencing that. And it's clearly not. I don't know. I wonder now if the first time through he was actually listening to an NCAA game or if that's just an excuse he makes up because he knows that he needs to record everything that's going on. And then he needs to listen to it back, right? So that may be actually a change from the original timeline as well. But that's kind of a smaller
And
detail.
they drop
Yeah.
hints, right? So I actually wrote down a couple hints that they did drop. Obviously, watching it after multiple times, like you pick up the stuff. I don't think you would pick it up the first time. One is when Abe is initially telling Aaron about like the math of when he's drawing the A-B diagram and trying to follow along. He does like the math and calculates the minutes, like 13:47 or something, really fast. And even Abe like looks up like that was fast.
Yeah.
And like that scene where Abe wakes up in his apartment, this is actually where I thought some of the editing was very well done because these are the hints that they're dropping in there. They had the repeat shot, so he's waking up, a second goes by, and then like they show him getting up again. So like you're being told like this is not his first time getting up in this room.
Right, like, there's iterations of that moment going on, right?
Yeah, so, like, they have, like, a little cut there to show that, it just repeats itself, and there was a few moments in the movie that had those cuts where it was a repeat. Yeah, so, I mean, whether it's the final Aaron or the failsafe Aaron, we just know we are watching the movie, at least from that point where Abe was waking up in his apartment. Because remember, Aaron is, like, ready to go have steak, and I'm thinking to myself, how does he like, these guys are spending all their money on this side project. Their jobs seem like they're making like a good life, but it's not like super extravagant. And he wants to go out and eat steaks, right? So he's presumably already been doing the stock market game and has already made some returns and has some money. And that's why he's willing to go out and splurge on steaks when Abe is like, I don't want to spend money on steaks. Let's get
Yeah, maybe
tacos.
that's what it is. I think the first time through the movie, I just interpreted that as like, you know, obviously at that point, Aaron has figured out something major is going on with this machine. And so he's kind of like ready to celebrate, and he hasn't kind of clued Abe in on exactly what that is until a few minutes later. And, you know, Abe kind of panics and he's like, what, the machine's stable? It's stable. And then they start kind of, they go and try to check out what actually is going on. But, more evidence to your take on it is the fact that I think Aaron seems to have everything figured out about this machine when he explains it to Abe to a degree where I'm just like, I mean, how much time passed were you able to figure all that out? And you know, you didn't talk to Abe in between. Abe didn't come to
Yeah.
the garage, and Abe seems to be the one who's more technically savvy from my standpoint. I think he seems
Mm-hmm.
to know how this stuff is supposed to work. He seems to know more than anyone which precautions he should be taking. I mean, the fact that he had the foresight to build a failsafe machine before ever trying time travel, right? And that's kind of a hard line. We know that he did that on the very first instance because if he had not, then he could never go back and recorrect it. So we know that that happened like the very first time that he perform time travel. He made the failsafe before ever doing it, and so the fact that he had the foresight to do that, I mean, that shows how ahead of the game he is on this stuff, right? So I do think it's kind of a there's a lot of things that Aaron does which don't seem to add up, but then when you realize later that this is not his first time through, then it starts making more sense. I think that's one of them, actually, just how well versed he was and how the machine was working at that point. Maybe, we're already seeing a second or third or 100th iteration of Aaron coming through that timeline.
Yeah, I think the biggest clue that they give that there's so many different errands is that the whole Granger, Thomas Granger, Rachel's dad, who they wanna like he's a potential funder investor into them to help them
Yeah.
grow. And they come across, right, Thomas Granger in the car, and they clearly can tell based on like Aaron has seen him earlier in the day and he was clean shaven, but in the car he has like a 2-3 day stubble. And so they know that he has used the machine. And now neither of them can figure out when or how or why they would have told Thomas Granger about the machine and why he would have like ended up actually using it. So what I'm getting from that is there's so many errands out there. It's been happening so many times, the time travel, that one of the instances like someone told Thomas Granger, and to the point that Thomas Granger used the machine. And the current version that we're seeing when that's revealed just have no idea about it because like they've lost control of all the errands that are out there, of all the timelines that are out there at this point. I mean, you see it slowly happening as they become less and less rigid and strict about the rules. They're watching TV in the hotel. They're watching the games and they know exactly what's going to happen. They're going out to eat. Aaron keeps his cell phone on him and on all the time, so it keeps ringing for
Yeah.
him. Like so, they become reckless, and it just falls into like this loss of control and confusion, and we just like they have no idea like how to correct it at a certain point.
Going back to the phone call, I think that's like a very significant moment, right? So let's talk about this.
Which one? The first one in the hotel or the second one when they're
Well,
going to
both
the
ones
restaurant?
simultaneously, I suppose. But yeah, so we don't know in that moment. I guess we don't really know, but let's assume that that was a genuine mistake where Aaron brought the cell phone into the room, at least the first time around. Maybe it was a genuine mistake. He accidentally brought the cell phone. He gets a phone call from his wife and he answers it. However, now when they go back in time, there are two duplicates of the exact same cell phone, like somewhere on the grid, right? In that town.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so what we see happening is,
In the time that they overlap, because they overlap only technically, I think, for like 6 hours a
right,
day or
6 hours.
something.
The time that the machine is running and these guys are sitting in the hotel room for that period of time, right? So
Yeah.
what ends up happening is when this phone call from Aaron's wife comes through on the line, I thought this was like a really cool, like very particular take where it's like, okay, this is how cell phones work, right? The cell phone towers are basically searching for the signal of that phone, and once the phone is found, it rings, and that's the end of it, right? But there's no real, it's the cell phone towers don't keep searching after they find the cell phone, right? So once they find the cell phone, they stop searching, which means that if there's two cell phones out there, whichever one it finds first is going to get the phone call. And so that's what happens, right? Aaron ends up getting the phone call on the street, whereas the first time around, he got it in the hotel room. And then at that moment, he knows that the version of him that's sitting in the hotel room right now is not getting the phone call, which means that that version of Aaron is not experiencing the day in the hotel room exactly the same as he just had experienced it that morning, right? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's a huge thing to them. I mean, they kind of panic for a second because they've, as they say, they've broken symmetry, right? They have affected
Mm-hmm.
their own experience of that day. So they start kind of saying, do I feel okay? Are we okay? And once they realize that everything's fine, that's when they start kind of getting more and more loose with the rules that they had set for themselves. So I thought that was kind of a really cool way to break symmetry. I also kind of just a fun point. I don't have any evidence of this, but I do think Avengers Endgame was inspired by that moment where basically you see a bunch of the characters traveling back in time, try and stop Thanos, and the Thanos of the past finds out about this because there's a character named Nebula, who is with him, who basically she's like half computer, so she's like, her brain is connected to some network, right? Her brain starts downloading files from the duplicate version from the future of herself, so she suddenly has all these
Mm.
memories that she shouldn't have, and she doesn't know where they came from. And that's when they realize, okay, there's another version of you on the planet at this moment, or not necessarily on the planet, in the universe in this moment. And so there's I felt that was very similar to the way that we have two duplicate cell phones going on, and the breaking of symmetry that goes on there. So that's kind of a cool thing where I feel like that moment was kind of inspired by Primer, which is a very popular time travel movie. It's kind of a cult movie, but I'm sure that the writers for a Marvel movie are well versed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you're gonna be writing any kind of movie, working with any kind of time travel, like Primer's got to be one of your standard watches to get a grasp of the ideas and like the whole how it
Yeah,
works.
100%. So I thought that was, first of all, I thought it was a beautiful tool for advancing the story in that moment. And yeah, I think you see it kind of inspiring other movies from, that big box office movies. So thought that was cool.
All right, okay, so where are we in the story right now? It's just like it's so chaotic
Yeah.
almost to go
I
through
don't think
this.
like we can properly discuss this entire movie. So whatever, we're kind of discussing bits and pieces here, but that's fine.
All right, so let's talk about that, or I guess the effects of the time travel. So one thing we see is that their handwriting it degrades the more and more they time travel. And the first time we actually see this is when both Abe and Aaron are in the library. They're looking at the stock market, what the gains are for the day, and you can see Aaron is really like concentrated while he's writing down his notes in his notebook to the point that Abe looks down and like even notices it, but he's still writing legibly. So I guess it says if you travel back in time, if you've gone through the failsafe, which was like 4 days, which is a long time, right? If you've done that, then it just takes a toll on your body to the point that you lose, I guess, your motor functions to a certain point. So that's when we knew, oh, that's I think that's my biggest clue to say that it is Aaron the failsafe that
Right.
we're watching in the movie
Yeah.
is because of that scene where I noticed that he is already struggling with his handwriting and has to like concentrate to do it right. And so we can assume that he's already been through the failsafe at this point. But it could be the Aaron or the final Aaron as well, because like we know there's a second box that he takes with
I
him.
think that is a definite clue, which I think we're in full agreement now that we're not watching the very first version of Aaron go through this timeline, right? So we're watching one of the versions that is kind of faking and pretending like he is experiencing all this for the first time. But yeah, we don't necessarily know which one. So yeah, I had mentioned that Aaron isn't the best actor, maybe. Part of that is kind of rectified by the fact that his character is now pretending to experience all these moments for the first time, right? So
Yeah.
his when his
Yeah.
reactions seem off, that actually makes sense because
Yeah, exactly. So it could almost be like how his reaction seems forced, but maybe because he has to
they are
force it
forced,
because
because
he knows what's
his
happening.
character
Yeah.
is playing a role at this point, right? So that's kind of just a, yeah, like I thought that kind of corrects some of the criticism that you can put on the acting, I suppose. And there's a lot of moments like that. But yeah, so we're this whole thing with the handwriting, yeah, we don't know, I guess, exactly why that happens. But yeah, you can assume that if you have to sit in this box for 4+ days in order to get back in time, with nothing but an oxygen tank and a limited amount of water or food or whatever, that's going to take a toll on your body, right? And that's why you see the first time that failsafe Abe comes back and he tries to meet Aaron, at the on the bench, he faints, right? We also see that Mr. Thomas, when they go chasing after him, wondering why is he in this timeline? He's clearly from the future. They go chasing after him, and then he suddenly collapses, in that backyard or whatever, and then he's comatose after that, and we don't really hear much about him after that, so we don't really know what happened to him. But obviously, these people who are traveling back in time, their bodies are getting messed up, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Physically is I guess grueling in some
One
way.
thing I had also heard, specific to the handwriting thing, is their bodies may start getting out of sync with other parts of their bodies, right? So if we think about this kind of from a mechanical standpoint of what's going on, you're in this time machine and then eventually you slide yourself out and pull yourself out, right? But obviously your whole
Mhm.
body does not get out in the exact same instance. There's some sort of millisecond latency there,
Oh.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what if
Like so your head is out before your
yeah,
arm and then your hand and then your
so
legs.
what
So
if parts
yeah.
of your body are actually a little bit out of the timeline compared to where your brain is, right? That can cause a lot of issues. That sounds like the scariest thing ever, actually. But right, so that may be an
I
explanation.
wonder if that's why Aaron misses the shot when he's taking the basketball shot. when he's inviting that guy
Right, because he
over. I
makes the
forget his
shot the
name.
first
Will.
time, right? And then
Yeah, he makes it in the first instance that's recorded, but the one that we see, he
I mean,
misses
I
it.
think we can safely assume his motor functions are significantly degraded. So, whether it's
Yeah,
whether it's so bad that he can't shoot a basketball, I'm sure he's worse at shooting a basketball at this point for sure, right?
yeah,
And so, like, yeah. And another thing actually to point out is before they make the box itself, when they just, the very first like device that they make, which is like the anti-gravity device. It's not enclosed in a box, but like there is like some sort of like electromagnetic field. Aaron keeps putting his hand over it and kind of trying to feel like what it feels like, and he keeps sticking his hands over this thing. So if we assume that that's the same technology and so it has some sort of time travel capabilities, then his hands are already getting out of sync from his body when he keeps doing that over and over, and that's in like the very first 10 minutes of the movie.
yeah. Because some things I just feel like they had in there to help the story move forward. So like the whole birthday party scene, like it's pretty significant to the movie because if you don't have the birthday party, then you don't have like reasons for Abe to go back. And then the whole Granger stuff. If I assume what pushes Air or Abe to go back to use the failsafe is that you have Granger who's comatose in the room, like in his place. So the only way to rectify that in his head is to go back to the failsafe, but he realizes that the failsafe is not the failsafe anymore because Aaron had reset the failsafe to be like a few hours shorter to give himself time for when he went back on the failsafe.
Yeah,
Get what I mean? Like he went back on the failsafe and then he waited a couple hours before starting that machine back up.
right.
So when Aaron came back, or when Abe came back, he was already 3 hours behind Aaron, the failsafe
That's
Aaron.
that's actually
So
a big point, right? Because
yeah, it
what we
is.
get is we basically get a struggle for control, right? And we were talking about morality. I mean, part of this thing is that these two guys are best friends, but they don't fully trust each other for some reason, right? So Abe makes this failsafe from the start and never mentions it to Aaron, because he wants to have the sole power to reset the entire thing and stop time travel from ever happening if he feels that it is the right thing to do. And he doesn't trust Aaron with that same ability. On the other hand, Aaron finds out about the failsafe, goes back through the failsafe, and builds his own failsafe a few hours ahead of Abe's failsafe, so that if Abe tries to pull any funny business, Aaron can always get back to a moment even further back that Abe can't access. So we have kind of a struggle for control going on, even though these guys are best friends. They clearly don't trust each other with this power. Neither of them do.
Yeah, so how do you think the ending works out? Because Abe is saying he wants to go back to the beginning and confuse or basically set up the scenario to the point where Aaron and Abe, the originals, give up on working on the machine any further. But how is Abe going to get back to that point? I didn't get it.
Um,
'Cause I thought that point is not accessible to him anymore because of what Aaron did.
I think there's only a few hours difference there, right? So like, I think he can still get to a point where
Oh,
he,
to a point to have them stop going any
yeah, so
further.
he can go back. I mean, I think at the point where he gets back to Abe, the original Abe, probably thinks that he's got this whole thing figured out. But if Abe goes in and
Hmm.
messes with the machine, suddenly it doesn't work, and then okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we're inspecting the machine again. We're trying to make repairs. We're trying to figure things out, and then this failsafe Abe is sneaking in whenever and just keeps sabotaging until hopefully they give up. That was his goal, I think. So I think his scenario didn't necessarily require getting all the way back to the beginning. But and so this is part of the thing that I loved about this movie, where I think after the credits roll, you're still kind of playing out all these scenarios of what these characters are up to and how things played out. So we have one version of Aaron working on this massive time machine. Then we have one version of Abe trying to stop time travel from ever happening. And you have to wonder how that went and how things may have played out if either of them would have been successful. So I mean, to me, that's a hallmark of a great movie, right? One that I think the ending was satisfactory, but you still have all these questions
Yeah.
left over, and you're still playing out scenarios.
It's a 77-minute movie, and you spend an equal amount of time after the movie just trying to understand it, figure it out, and wonder what is gonna happen.
Easily, probably even more time, right? Because
Yeah.
I think we spent the length of the movie right now just trying to discuss what happened, and I could go on for hours. So
I think we'll leave it at that at this point. I think we discussed most of what we can discuss and what we understand. To be honest, there might be a lot of stuff that we're missing.
I think everyone's got to watch this movie, and they're gonna have their own questions, and they're gonna have their own answers. So
Yeah, and everyone's got to watch it at least twice.
At least twice.
It's a short movie, so it's an easy task to watch it
Yeah.
twice. It's not overbearing.
And I think that was one thing I thought about. Like, is a movie? I don't think, to me, a movie that you have to watch twice to understand it, I don't think that's necessarily disqualifying in terms of the quality of the movie, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah,
If
because
anything, if you can watch it again and be equally interested as you were the first time, that's a testament of how good the movie is, not anything about how bad it is.
that's the real criteria right there, right? I think I could watch this movie again and just be just as engaged, if
Yep.
not more, because now the second time through, you actually know that you're not watching Aaron for the first time, you're watching him for the second time, and there's a lot of tells there that you can kind of pick up on this time. So I think that only makes the movie better. It has a life beyond just the 77 minutes. So high recommendations for the story.
High recommendations from me, and I'm not a big sci-fi guy, to be honest, but when a story is this engaging, it's hard to pass up. It's something you have to watch, in my opinion. All right, I guess we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Yousuf.
Thanks, Faraz. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this production of The Twice Over. If you would like to keep up with us, please subscribe wherever you listen, and check out our website, thetwiceover.com, and follow us at The Twice Over on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you would like to support us, you can do so on Patreon, or you can just tell a friend about this podcast. And finally, if there are any comments or feedback, please email them to us at comments@thetwiceover.com, or you can just tweet at us. The music you hear is from Amerigo Gazaway. Check him out on Bandcamp and Spotify. We'll be back next week with another episode.
Well, I'm gonna have to think for